I believe overall you could make the general statement that the pandemic has only accelerated a shift in consumer behavior, and that as a result has created much more urgency for there to be a similar shift in the metrics by which that consumption is actually measured, attributed, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that the pandemic actually sort of accelerated progress in the industry. And I think that's only going to continue as new variants arise and as the business continues to adopt a more digital like model to reporting and optimization.
So you mentioned streaming, for example, just then. The availability of data is obviously very uneven across different pools of TV inventory. Which parts of the market are obviously data rich and which are data poor? And does this matter?
So I think when you take a step back and think about who's data rich and who's data poor, it depends on what kind of data you're actually talking about. So I think it's quite obvious that the MVPDs and the ISPs have a very rich trove of one type of data, but then it's also quite clear that there are other businesses in the ecosystem that have their own really valuable data, and that could be a brand like one of the larger retailers that actually has set up its own in-house DSP, or some of the things that Amazon has been doing with their data. But I think what's the most interesting to me is that it's not just that there are parts of the ecosystem that still don't have access to any real data, but that if you take a look back at the legacy television business, it was always really reliant on an outside party to provide it with data. And that data was based off of, one specific set of households and individuals. And so therefore the television industry itself never had the opportunity until recently to start to develop its own trove of first party data and its own set of viewership data. And as the pandemic has accelerated the shift to consumption on CTV and more digital video, that has actually put a little bit more power into the hands of the programmers and the TV publishers that can now capture those device IDs and actually start to assemble a view and append attributes to those IDs to understand who their audience is, and that's their own first party data.
So the other big question that the industry is grappling with, I guess, is about process. In your view, how mature are the processes that support data sharing, commingling, matching, and so on?
So taking another step back, I think that the industry for a very long time relied on pretty manual processes for the actual onboarding and matching of data. And that's kind of universal across the board. And I think what's changed is that with the advent of the shift into more connected television and digital video, there's more of an immediacy now than there used to be. And so it doesn't really work any longer to have a 4 to 7 day time frame to onboard an audience and match it to a specific identifier in order to activate an addressable campaign, regardless of what media we're talking about, because at that point, half of your addressable opportunity may actually have evaporated. And so I think what we're seeing now is demand on the part of brands and advertisers for the overall process by which data is moved to speed up. And we're also seeing a resistance to actually wanting to move that data. So it's a combined shift in thinking about the way data is actually managed that I think we're starting to see. And I think it'll be interesting to watch how it plays out over the next year as clean rooms continue to rise and the need to actually optimize comes into play, because there are certainly challenges with the infrastructure as it exists today around that.
That's really interesting. I guess then looking forwards, what do you see as the big challenges that need to be solved at an industry-wide level to really bring this ecosystem into maturity, to really make sure that those processes are working well?
I think it's actually going to come down to, very boringly, some sort of standardization of measurable units to start with. So it isn't just about needing to standardize the data that's available in the ecosystem from an identity data standpoint and having visibility into that. I think what is also needed is, I think we need to have an understanding not only of what constitutes an impression, but is the value of a linear television impression the same as the value of a premium digital video impression? And so it's a combination of us from a methodology standpoint coming together to decide what the prevailing sentiment is going to be around how we're defining these things, but then it's also around the second piece, which is the tech and the actual device data that's being used to connect all of those impressions up at the end of the day. So it's 1 + 1 = 2, and without both parts having some form of standardization, whether that's rules that are put in place by a governing body in the industry, or whether it's everyone agreeing on a set of standards, whatever that might be, I think that that's going to be very important. And once that happens, which I think will happen over the next year, we'll really start to see more money shift into these new buckets of addressability than was able to shift previously, because some of the barriers will be removed.